Fantastic. Okay, thank you, Sam. And Sam, you'll help with this poll questions, is that right?
Absolutely, yes.
Excellent, excellent. Well, hi, everybody. I think we're off to a great closure, right, with this panel discussion. My name is Shaheen Lakan. I was part of this earlier. I'm a neurologist, pain physician, SVP of R&D at Click Therapeutics, where we make software for medical device. Today's panelists, we have 10 panelists. This is a great group, diverse backgrounds. We have folks from medical device within pharma, companies that are medical device only, health technology, every single therapeutic area that you could imagine, some consultancy, investments, BD portfolios, you name it, we have it here today. And we're all gathered here to discuss bringing innovation to your medical device project with AI and breakthrough technology. Pretty large topic, right? And some of this has been reactionary and some strategic, right? Reactionary in the sense of COVID-19 and quick adoption. But as we had time to settle, we could take very strategic steps to move forward. I think we should do a round of introductions, but keep it kind of short, one by one, making their introductions. And we could start off with Elizabeth, and you could call on someone, Elizabeth, and eventually it'll come back to me. Yes.
Okay, well, hello, I'm Elizabeth Gadsby. I'm with Bloomer Tech. My background is in innovation, starting in a large consumer products company, but then doing entrepreneurial ventures and eventually entrepreneurial ventures. My passion is for seeing innovation that actually impacts people's lives and improves it on a daily basis. And what Bloomer Tech is about is improving women's heart health through collecting key data that is female-centric, because that has been left out, and we're talking about AI and data and how valuable it is. So I will pass it on to, feel like the Brady Bunch, Simon.
My microphone to work here. Yeah, I'm Saucer. I work at Technologies, the OR guru, spending tens of or thousands of hours in the OR, mainly in ophthalmology. And I've been really happy today to present our new OR bot system, which has got some really novel solutions for the OR to come in the next few years. Would you like
Great. And with
pass
that,
on?
Raphael? Oh, sure. Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah, Simon, you can pass. Or we could just, we could move on to Raphael. Yes.
I think all of you guys have heard enough from me today. But I'm the director of translational science for a small medtech company developing organ preservation technology for transplantation. We focus right now on hearts, but we've done kidneys, we've done limbs, and I'm happy to be here and discuss with everyone.
Great. Stephen? Stephen hasn't joined yet. That's okay. Robert?
Thanks, Raphael. I'm Rob Kemp, and I'm with Zambon US. We're not necessarily a household name in the US yet, but our parent company is an Italian company that has been around for 100 years and has recently gotten into the severe respiratory disease area. My position is VP of Market Access and HEOR, but I also have a real interest in the digital health space, and that's what really got me into the AI applications, and the new buzzword is digital therapeutics.
Great. Jane? Do you have Jane on? No. Then Danny?
Hello, everyone. My name is Danny Brigi. Can everyone hear me? All right, perfect. My name is Danny Brigi. I'm the Director of Global Health at Brigi Scientific. We are a medical device company focusing in biocontainment. Our platform was originally developed for a wide range of clinical applications, and for the last 5 years, we have been developing it as the world's first single-use and multi-purpose neonatal incubator, primarily for premature and at-risk newborns. And with the onset of COVID-19, we actually pivoted our platform to one of our original ideas, which was a containment unit for infectious aerosols like COVID-19. And so, with the original idea having come about around the Ebola, crisis that happened in Africa, we took it to the FDA, and we recently received emergency use authorization. So this was a big milestone for us, and we're now taking it around the world and hoping we can roll out our device in several different markets.
Wow, congrats.
Yes, hi, Lacan. Hi, everyone. Excuse me. Hi, my name is Jennifer Dakpano-Kamansky. I come from Novartis as part of a regulatory affairs medical device team who are responsible for various combination and standalone medical device products within the Novartis portfolio. But additionally, the precision medicine diagnostics associated with that therapies, and that's where I come in. In contributing to this discussion, it's considered one of the breakthrough technologies, not just in the oncology space, but in the general medicine space as well. So that's where my expertise lies, and where my contributions to the organization are particularly focused on companion diagnostic technologies, clinical and regulatory strategies. So thank you, and looking forward to the discussion.
Sounds good. And lastly, I think, Payman, you've been coming in and out, so can you hear us? If not, that's okay. So we have Payman Afshari, who has some technical difficulties from J&J. He's a senior principal engineer. Excellent. And Sam, am I missing anyone?
Yeah, I think we have everybody here.
Great. Okay, well, let's take a dive. I know that we want to start off with some poll questions, and the poll questions is for the entire audience. Should we go through those?
Yes, please. So our first poll question we have is, has COVID-19, of course, impacted your ability to develop your device pipeline? Yes, no, a little bit. Head over to the polls section over here on to the right. We can all give our vote. I'm pretty confident one way or another we've all been affected the past year and a half. So that's our first poll question. Our next poll question is, after the pandemic began last March, has your organization adopted new software or procedures to support your project? Yes or no? And then finally, what are some challenges your organization has faced when adopting these new technologies? So, for example, getting everyone up to speed, lack of training, clients preferring a different set of technology, etc.
I guess if it's more than one, it'll be the most challenging. Okay.
Perfect. Awesome.
Great. No, thank you, Sam. And so it looks like we're going to keep people in suspense, and after a round of discussions, we'll reveal the poll answers. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Fun tactic. We should just dive into the session for all the panelists. Actually, there's some questions that were generated from the audience, and if there's further questions, please put them, populate them into the right panel over here, the discussion section on the right. But the first is, what are the key lessons learned that people need to know to help them maximize their project success during COVID? And of course, there's different phases. Some we're in the midst of projects in the beginning, and others, like I was saying, we could be more strategic. So if anyone wants to open the floor about lessons learned, particularly trying to get to project success in this time frame, that would be great. Elizabeth, looks like you would like to address this. Yeah.
I would. Well, this was a hard question. I like that, has it impacted? Yes, but positively and negatively, right? So, and I was waiting to see if Danny jumped in, because when we were talking earlier, he was describing his product and how I think a lot of cases, especially in medical devices, there is a greater appreciation for health and for personalized health, and the ability to have wearables and control and virtual access. So on the positive side, I think that it's helped our stakeholders, help people understand the need. On the negative side, obviously a lot of challenges in adapting to virtual workplace in some cases. And I would say probably one of the biggest is long lead times. And I'm seeing that even more now when we're trying to get various supplies. That certainly has increased the time for getting things and then being able to implement. So requires some advanced thinking and ordering. So those are my thoughts.
Have others had similar or differing experiences than that? I've certainly had the supply chain issue. Yes, and then the cultural challenges working in this, at first fully remote model and now hybrid model. So absolutely, yes. Others?
Yeah, we've had some issues with semiconductor needing the computer chips for some of our technology. That's cool.
Sam, is that on my end or is it for everyone? I can't hear him.
It's everyone.
Got it. Simon, you have a technical issue. I think a bandwidth issue. We can't fully hear you.
Yeah, something slowing things down over here. Yeah.
Exactly.
So we were just. Did you understand what I said?
Not really.
Okay. So we've had some delays on chip supply. So ordering 10 pieces got you sometimes just one. Obviously slowed down the entire development process.
Got it. Exactly. Oh, yeah. So this is more so on the supply chain, particularly for chips, hardware components. Definitely. And then, more so on the, Elizabeth, you were discussing on the internal working dynamics and culture. I've seen a lot of shifts in talent, essentially. Obviously, geographical restrictions were lifted, and that just opened the pool, and more efforts on retention, more recruitment just picked up. Yeah. Did you have such issues too?
I was hoping my moving boxes were not in the image there. I had tried to clear them all because on Friday we moved. So yes, I think that's absolutely something that's, again, positive, negative. I actually have never met face-to-face with any of my colleagues at Bloomer Tech because I joined the company early this year. But I still feel very connected. I think that this is something all of us are going to be going through. And maybe it's not exactly AI, but it's certainly technology of how do we use this to continue to improve our productivity and allow that bandwidth to work with people from all over the world, no matter where they are.
And it's a great call out. So what type of technologies have others introduced to keep people connected in a healthy work culture?
Hi, I wouldn't necessarily say. I think it sounds as though, and it'd be interesting to see the poll. It seems as though I'm sure every single company had to incorporate a new type of technology for communication, especially communication with their patients. But I think one of the things that really helped our organization was balance. Right, we're home now. We took away our commute time, and now we're under pressure to deliver. But does that mean our commute time doesn't belong to us anymore? And does that make us more productive employees for the organization? So even though we were put under the gun to continue delivering, continue making sure there was no disruption to patients, it was also very strongly emphasized that you need to know when to turn off your computer, when you know your 9 to 5 actually ends, so that you can wake up and be a productive, because then it impacts patients down the road if you're not making the right decisions because you've decided to work the 18 hours of the day when you should have been commuting. So not necessarily technology, but in terms of culture, it's something that we all had to learn how to really incorporate into our lives.
Yeah, definitely. I found that I've not used Slack as much as I've ever have in this time period, let alone all the teleconferencing Zooms and things out there. Um, but it's interesting. Some companies have prioritized first. Obviously, what's their service line? If it's patient centrics or B2B to other clients, before looking internally as well. Have other had those issues? It looks like a lot of nods, but I'm not sure if anyone wants to expand on that. Yeah.
Sure, I could actually jump in. I think the common thread to build off of what Jennifer and Elizabeth both really were trying to explain about how culture is shifting. I'm always asking myself, are we really ready for this kind of paradigm shift right now? And what have we seen over the last 18 months? Has it affected people positively or negatively? And if we're going to talk about anything from remote work to AI, I think you should really look at the people on the front lines when it comes to nurses, the technicians, people who are maintaining healthcare as we know it. And they've come under tremendous stress. There's really a healthcare shortage and a crisis in the U.S. right now. And we really have to think about, is it something that AI is going to be helping? Is remote work going to be helping them? And, these are the people that they're going to be interacting with. And how is, as Jennifer said, how's it going to affect patients down the line? So if we're going to be thinking about any solutions that are going to be levied on top of them, on top of what they're already going through, I think it's very important to really think about what kind of strategic and cultural shifts that the executives are going to have to make. And do they really, want to put the interests of the healthcare providers first? That's really been my main concern, working very closely with the front line with our, COVID-19 protective barrier. I mean, we made it for them, and so that it doesn't spread across the healthcare facilities, and to really see the inner workings of how they quickly develop protocols, how they're able to be very nimble. The technologies really need to match that. And I guess if I took it from this very, on the ground level and just shot us up to the stratosphere very quickly, I think the global approach and the opportunities right now, there's a lot of, of course, a couple companies here that have parent companies abroad or work internationally. You come from big multinational conglomerates or the like. I would say there's a lot of opportunities that the United States has kind of, us as a culture have foregone. And I think there are fantastic opportunities where a lot of companies that have been born and bred in the United States or abroad, and they're taking the best of what we know as American innovators, and they're approaching markets that we kind of let fall by the wayside during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that's one of the greatest lessons that we learned, and that they're actually willing to pick up the slack perhaps. And there's a lot of lessons we can learn. So if there's anything that people should take away from maybe what I'm going to say on this panel, it's that you should really start investing in global strategy and incorporating multiple different cultures and approaches, so that when you do consider the paradigm shift of whatever your technology is, it can really help the people you're trying to treat or the people whose lives you're trying to make easier, like the front line. That's really something I've learned over the last year.
Very insightful. So, I mean, basically, we can't maintain the same modus of operations moving forward, and we have to look at, our clients and the stakeholders. Their workflows have entirely changed, and so we have to address that. So, concretely, if folks on the call can give us examples, how have they adapted operationally, to react to the changing workflows of their clients? Yeah.
This is Stephen Hall. Am I live? Can people hear me?
Mm-hmm.
just in response to what Danny was saying, so our firm is focused on international market access since the beginning. We're consultants. And I've actually long thought that US-based companies have left 40, 50, 60% of revenue on the table by not having sufficient focus on some of the key markets overseas. Forget about developing markets, just Western Europe and Japan, and not resourcing them in the same way they would resource the US, and not thinking through the evidence strategy they're going to need for those places, and almost relegating it to kind of an afterthought, kind of an idea. And time again, I've seen devices with enormous potential that have only scratched the surface in terms of their potential because of that. So for sure, the U.S., by virtue of the dollar being the main currency of trade, we have an unbelievable opportunity in front of us to sell our products successfully. And we sort of do it when it's convenient. We don't really do it as a major focus, and I think that's a big gap.
I think that's a great call out of not putting, and it's even actually telling in how we address it, this ex-US or beyond US. You can see the centricity involved in that use of that term, but it's an industry standard term. So not putting it on the back burner, but actually, front loading it. In fact, that might even be your primary markets in the US, if you even choose to go into it as secondary. I really like that approach, yeah.
And the lens through which I see this is, what is the driver of evidence in the United States? It's the FDA.
Yes.
In a way, the FDA is driving our development of products for the entire globe. And it's just such a huge mess. Anyway, that's all I'll share.
Yeah. But Stephen, actually, no, I want to probe you a little bit. But on that note, some people question that exact statement, the regulatory pathways, the clinical adoption, the interoperability from going outside of the US. Obviously, country and region specific. Some are more advanced in some of these processes than others. What say you to that?
Well, obviously we're big advocates for going out into the world and selling your product successfully, and to uncouple your product development and evidence plan from what the FDA requires. Because sometimes the FDA doesn't require that much for a device. And in Britain, NICE will take one look at the product and just rip it to shreds. Same with the Japanese. So you need to think about what the unmet need is globally, and think of this, of all of these things, as part of a commercialization plan, and not anchoring everything around just regulatory. And staffing and investing properly in those markets. I think that the classic problem for startups is they're just overwhelmed. They're thin on resources, and they can only focus on this market first, one at a time. And it's really best to try to do things right the first time. So at least Western Europe, Japan, those are large, lucrative markets. They're worth a good look for companies with promising tech. I don't know if I answered your question, but
you absolutely have. And I just have to talk about the elephant in the room. How about China? And obviously, I haven't given you a therapeutic area indication or what pursuit, medical device or otherwise, but that's always under the discussion. And market size, appeals, but less infrastructure on regulatory pathways for digital therapeutics, for instance, reimbursable pathways, a lot of self-pay that's happening there. How do we address that? Yeah,
I don't know if anyone else here works in China. Our experience there is the reimbursement, at least, is pennies on the dollar. And they've relied heavily on cash pay even for reimbursed products. That is all now changing. They're trying to clamp down on that and reduce the burden on patients, trying to consolidate procurement, trying to bundle everything in what we call a DRG payment. So it's a very dynamic market, tough to predict. I think it's super strong still for capital equipment companies because the volumes are huge and they can amortize those costs very well. Implants, I think the biggest companies in this industry are scratching their heads right now.
Right. Completely see that.
I'm curious if others on the phone have China experience and insights.
Yeah,
I haven't been there in over a year and a half, of course, but
yeah, we've been working there for over 4 or 5 years. Great connections, and as far as supply chains go, we've always had backups because they've just been wonderful at getting us what we need when we need it, even at the height of the COVID pandemic. But as far as the lucrative market, we work directly in maternal and child health, and it's a problem everywhere, even in the United States. So working directly in, the largest, regional governments in China, they wanted to bring our technology over, and they gave us some really great incentives to do so. But, between the politics, the infrastructure, and really just how was it going to be implemented, we want to make sure that we could train it ourselves and do it ourselves, and it just didn't seem like we could have that control over there. So I think that might be another deterrent for a lot of companies, especially startups like us, where we really just don't have that kind of control. We've been told to have some political leeway, and we have to make a lot of friends, and that sort of that's a big opportunity cost to just focus on one country. So you did mention, Stephen, Western Europe. Right now, I'm actually deep in an R&D secret facility in the Balkans, and we're here actually working with some really, really great talent to try to develop it, because we have maternal and child health deserts out in places like this, but it's still part of the EU. So that's really important for us to really balance the market opportunity with proving that we have a technology that can work in the middle of nowhere, but our supply chain still goes back to China. And that's still a place that we would like to go to. And right now, our COVID application is also very much needed in India. So we have the same sorts of balances that we have to make, and for a 5-person company, there's a lot of strategy that we have to build in to what we're trying to do. And I don't think all the investment money in the world can really make up for the fact that we have something that we have to be very delicate with. It's a brand new technology and platform, and it's not something that we can just dump on the market and, do with minimal training. So we've seen the world from many different perspectives globally. I have to say that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, but we have to be very cautious.
Interesting. Thank you.
Great. And a bit along this note, but not exactly, there are different compliance, regulation, even ethical standards, right? That folks have, because society sets at least the latter part of it. Elizabeth, I think you wanted to share some.
I think that it's an important part when we talk about the technology side. We've said that we're looking to do this to serve the patients, to serve the frontline healthcare workers. And so we also have to think about the people side of things and the ethics. And so I really like when we have discussions about AI and innovation and technology to bring that aspect out and to be thinking about and exploring that with others. So, first, you have to be honest. You have to be transparent with your information, how you're going to use it. You have to have justice and fairness, and then beneficence. How are we benefiting, and how do you handle that risk benefit? So, there's a lot of sci-fi movies out there about AI and how scary it's going to take over all our jobs and rule the world. And so I just like to open that up. I know for Bloomer Tech, we're being very careful with the data, being very protective of it. So a lot of these things in data privacy, how you maintain it, and then certainly ultimately how you use it and disperse it for the benefit of others. And one final thing I would add to that is bias. So when we look at a lot of the, well-publicized issues with AI, there have been situations where if your data is not inclusive, then your results are not going to be inclusive. And that's why Bloomer Tech is looking for women's heart health. It's the number one killer of both men and women. And if the data is primarily focused on men, we miss the ability to understand and properly treat a very large part of the population that females happen to be. But then there's also many minorities and small parts of the population. So going back to this discussion about global, when you're thinking about your market, from an ethical standpoint, does it matter if they're the largest or the most able to pay?
There's a really interesting story that I did promise my small LinkedIn following that I would mention, actually. Something very, very inspiring. When I was in South Korea, I met a fellow neonatal innovator, and he rolled out an AI-based software platform about 4 years ago. And when I met him 3 years ago, he had already put about 300,000 newborns through his AI, which predominantly is made to predict the onset of sepsis in newborns. And nosocomial infections are a major issue in the NICUs. And so, anywhere from 15 to 50% of infants who are in the NICU get affected by it. And I would say probably by now, I haven't asked him on the most recent numbers, but it's probably in the millions of infants that he has helped just by taking in all of the analog data and being able to predict the onset of sepsis anywhere from 72 to 96 hours before the actual infection occurs, which is really incredible. Now, the ethics of this is the fact that he's doing it outside the United States, and he's, a Stanford engineer. He's worked for some of the biggest companies in the world. So obviously he has the credentials to be able to pull something like this off with some of the biggest institutions in India. But I don't see him going and rushing towards the FDA anytime soon unless he has just an irrefutably large mountain of data that they just can look at and say, okay, well, you've certainly set the standard for this kind of technology. But beyond that, he's really going to be focusing internationally. So with that, I would just, end the thought on saying that I would say all organizations and companies should really approach their global strategy with a medical diplomatic mindset and figuring out exactly what it means to kind of hold your whole company on your shoulders and say, this is what I'm going to do for your country, because it opens up incredible opportunities when the governments and locals really look at you and say, you're really coming here to do something impactful for us. And that's going to be the future. And if you want to talk about China and everybody else, if they can't innovate, they're going to do medical diplomacy. And I know people have, seen mixed results in that in the last 18 months with companies trying to do it, but that's going to set the pace moving forward. And I think that's something that is vastly undervalued in a strategic framework, and I think compassion in general is kind of undervalued as a form of power. So that's kind of what I believe.
And we built a whole company on it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We built a whole company on it, and it works. I promise you.
Drives your company, exactly. In fact, it definitely should for ours. Click Therapeutics, it's democratizing healthcare, not just access to healthcare, because you could give access to poor quality healthcare and actually get worse outcomes than no healthcare. Well published, well researched, essentially. So it's access to quality healthcare and patient empowerment, right? Robert, you were discussing digital therapeutics earlier in your introduction. Yes, I would love to hear your take on technology, AI, and particularly because you're in the HUOR market access.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I was just listening to the conversations, and one thing I'll share just before I give you a specific example is that I actually started with a company called Breath Therapeutics. We're the innovators, and we were acquired by Zambon, and our integration has taken place during the pandemic. So we've had a lot of cultural issues. I think one of the things is that, coming from a company like Breath, and now we're Zambon, we're trying to you were trying to build those customer relationships. We're in a pre-market, pre-launch stage. We're in clinical development phase 3 with a drug device combination. And one of the things that happened through the pandemic, because the study populations are stem cell transplant patients and lung transplant patients, our clinical trials were stopped. So one of the things we had to rethink, because you can imagine with these patients, they're not just living, geographically, they're not necessarily in where the transplant center is, they're remote. And the other part of it is there's a real concern even now, and we've been able to restart our trial. But one of the things that has us looking at, and actually my colleague who's listening in on the conversation now is much closer on the clinical research side, but we're looking at home spirometry, because we did deal with a disease called bronchiolitis obliterans syndrome, which is in lung transplant, 50% of patients will die from BOS, and about 33% will die in the stem cell population. So it's real. It's a rare disease. But one of the things that we're trying to do is address that there's this transition of care from the transplant center. There's a need. One of the things that actually is vital is FEV1 measurement or spirometry measurement, because that's really our biomarker. And where the AI is going to come in is being able to collect some of this data and gain some insights. And right now, with the transplant centers, they're very hyper vigilant. Let's say in a lung transplant setting, of taking spirometry in the first year, but it falls off. And that's when these patients will develop BOS. And so we're needing to look at the subtlety of changes in FEV1, also encouraging patients to be able to do it consistently, these measurements. And we need to, this is going to be, because ultimately we have to find patients in the early stages of BOS, because the damage, the fibrosis in the lung, is not reversible. And then also another patient population that will be interested in the group is that as a result of COVID, the lung damage is BOS. We're seeing that same lung damage. And a lot of these candidates that are going to need lung transplants. So my experience prior to joining Breath and now Zambon is a lot of in digital therapeutics is in the diabetes care area, and some of the larger players, and also in MS. But in our case, this is going to be very pivotal, and we're dealing with all of those issues. I'm coming up from a market access HUR standpoint. I've successfully, in Canada and the US, done things where we've gotten coverage for expensive type 2 insulin, type 2 diabetic insulin, and other types of, and we see, despite being a rare disease, we're still going to have to ensure compliance and be able to identify those early stage. So that's the setting that we're in. And of course, one of the things that with the clinical trial is changing protocols. That's not easily to do when all of a sudden we want to introduce the home spirometry. And as I said, my colleague Jens that's listening in can tell you all the horror stories about that, but that's what we're looking at. So, it's also from the commercial side, the uptake of this treatment. I mean, we're not looking at a lot of patients globally. So we have some very specific markets, and we have to work hand in hand with the different governments. And because this is in rare disease, the U.S., of course, presents another unique challenge, a lot of its geography. But that's what we're doing at Zambon right now.
Oh, that's great to hear. I actually shared some of the same challenges. In fact, would have loved to have your solution. I worked on a rare disease program at Modis Therapeutics, a mitochondrial disease called TK2 deficiency. Yes. Sure. And so I was there in the midst of COVID in the transition where, they need a spirometry. Their lungs fail. That's one, in addition to their heart and others. And I think we might have had a business relationship there together. It just happened to be a small world.
Shaheen, one of that's interesting you mentioned that, but on the technology side, like we're a drug device combination. So we have a nebulizer and a novel handset. But the other component is now on the home spirometry. The technology's advanced a lot too, as you're probably aware.
Oh yes.
And so it's not these big standalone units now, but it's also, the thing is ease of use, of course, and then getting patients to use it, but also on the communication side, data integration side.
Yeah, and actually on that note, and I trust, Robert, you're using this, who is using AI in their product, either in development or commercialized? I know AI is a loaded term, so we'll dissect it. Yes.
Well, I'm using that, and Jens, who I mentioned, is listening to me saying, "Where am you coming from, Rob?" But it will be. We've talked to a couple companies and who are specializing in the home spirometry, but also the analytics side. And this is where we're hoping we should be able to develop a digital biomarker from it. If
I may add, we don't use AI directly right now. It's a medical device, just perfuse. But one of our collaborations with the Wyss Institute at Harvard, the drug that we're using to study with DARPA to lower metabolism to hibernation came out of their AI platform. So they do a lot of like high throughput screening using AI. And one of the drugs that we're testing is actually several compounds, but it was using AI. In terms of like transplantation and the future of AI and that, I know a few collaborators, and there is research ongoing on how can we use AI to create better matches of the donor and the recipient. I mean, the current matching is very limited, right? To only a few HLA markers and the sex, a few comorbidities, and But if we were able to add way more variables, even proteomics, metabolomics, can we come up with a better matching? And I know there's some serious research happening on the different organs on this area. So that's, I mean, as far as our company using AI right now, we're not, but it is, you know, the drug at least came out of an AI platform.
Great. And are there others using it in their products, either in development or the precursors of development, it looks like, as well, like in Raphael's case?
I can say definitely at Novartis, we've been using AI for quite some time and merely to collect a lot of information and to collect information across the hundreds of trials that we run so that we can better guide, you know, future trials and teams and so on and so forth. But interestingly, we run into hiccups where, you know, just like any new technology, you have to learn how to standardize your information. Right, so standardizing your definitions, standardizing your traceability, standardizing, you know, your regulatory strategies, and so it's certainly been a very useful tool for the organization, but there are still a lot of things that, you know, a lot of kinks that need to be worked out, especially when it comes to good machine learning practice, and as Elizabeth had mentioned before, reducing as much bias as possible. So it's, you know, definitely a great tool, but it's not the perfect tool just yet, for sure.
Yeah, those are great solutions. I mean, I've used AI in even pipeline prioritization and weightage of assets, social media crawling to a degree, right, to informing what that unmet patient need is, actually from patients' mouths, not the patient panels or professional societies or those types of groups, in predicting the placebo response and predicting enrollment and forecasting. I mean, you just name it. We've used it in all of it. And of course, in the product itself as a digital therapeutic, every user kind of informs their own journey. And so I'm of the ilk, and I would like to know if others are, that if you collect data, it should be meaningful to that individual that you collect it from, right? So that could be simply reporting, and there's some feedback that you could get from it, but also could help others, you know, that are in a similar situation based on parameters. Yeah. Elizabeth?
Yes, I think that's such a great point. And when we talked about beneficence and the ethics of are you benefiting, and so often in clinical trials and our informed consent, we have to just say you're doing this for the benefit of society once we have this. But as we build that data, I think it should be a both and instead of an either or. So that personalized medicine, can we give them their data? But we need to be very careful that we're giving it to them in a meaningful way. Because sometimes data is not helpful and can be harmful if it's misunderstood and therefore misused. So being able to take that data and making it meaningful in the short term and then in the longer term for the individuals and then also the broader population. I think that's a very
yes. Yeah, we've seen some dire consequences of sharing genetic data, right, to folks without the right context. In fact, a handful of cases where that's just gone awry. You know, Jennifer, you come from the regulatory world, right, in medical devices, and there's been some wins for AI, even non-rule-based AI out there. Do you want to maybe discuss some of that and where you see the future of, at least here in the States, the FDA regulation on AI? In both like assisted, you know, there's image analyses, but also in actual therapeutics for the management of diseases. Yeah.
I don't really have much expertise in that area per se, but I will say that, you know, as in my last point, it's one of the things that FDA needs to understand from the industry. They want as much harmonization as possible when it comes to these technologies, and it needs to start with the industry. And I know they're working with the industry to really build up a database to work towards this harmonization, because if it doesn't happen, then, you know, it doesn't really help them make informed decisions. But I think that's kind of where they are now. You know, clearly, especially with the device agency, it's something that they've had to put on hold for quite some time.
It sounds good, and it's almost the antithesis of a tech model: iterate, iterate, iterate. but it's almost now it's lock controls and right and parameters. And so how do you blend the two? I mean, did you folks come across this or have solutions?
I think that, like you were saying, it's like you do have to lock certain parts in. And so if you have solid processes in the same way as you do in manufacturing, I think that that's kind of been the approach of saying if you've got the right controls and the right risk assessments, and then you can say that that process will maintain and allow those iterations to be acceptable. At least that's my understanding of kind of the approach.
Got it. Do others have differing or similar opinions? Yeah. Okay, sounds good. And Sam, at this point, should we queue up the audience for any questions for the panel? Sam, you still there? That's okay. He's actively collecting questions right now. Exactly. And let's see. Oh, Payman, we could see you now. Excellent. If you want to maybe, address the topic, if you're using AI in your solutions anywhere, whether it's product or in the business, we can't hear you. I was premature, so he's still having technical issues. We can't hear Payman. Yes. That is fine. That is fine. Are there other data sources that you've now consulted and have incorporated? Do people have data lakes? Do they have APIs that they draw into it? Is that becoming the basis of your AI? I'm curious about that.
Well, I know that the people doing organ transplant AI research, I mean, the biggest database that we have, that is at least in the United States nationally, is the UNOS database. So the United Network of Organ Sharing Alliance, and you can request data. They have data from back in 1986, I think, or 1985, all the way to current, of almost every single transplant that has been conducted in the United States. So I know some folks that are doing research on that, and they use that as a base to be able to come up with like a better model of matching using AI. At least that in the transplant world is that, and then obviously individual transplant centers have way more data than UNOS data collects. So I know that other people are usually using transplant center data to mine that for AI.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of you have centralized multiple, let's say, data sources. You have the central entity and then these others. I know that they have unique identifiers that link them. But outside of that, has anyone been using tokenization of data, aggregators to get data sources? Yeah.
I think some of the challenge that we've seen is that in many cases the data is incomplete. So there was a recent journal article that talked about, and of course I'm interested in women's heart health, that cardiology studies that didn't even capture whether the patient was male or female. So it makes it very difficult. There's a lot of data out there, but then how do you actually use it effectively? And so that's the real impetus for us to go out and now collect the data. I think that will be the case in many different fields where we realize what's missing and then how can we collect that.
I see. And on that note, so there's active data collection efforts, and then there's passive data that you could get right from wearables, any sensor, really, smartphone, you name it, as long as you're not actively inputting something and it's monitoring you passively, you could collect that. Are folks using that in their Maybe not. So
I think one of the questions about that, and I think I'd be interested in whether the hesitancy in using it is the quality of it. right? So a lot of these devices that are out there that are wearables, especially consumer products, don't have all the validation and the credibility behind them. And so that's why I think it's important that as we advance in the technology, we can get good quality as well as quantity.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting. Some of the gold standards that we have here in like CNS research, neurology research, you have subjective measures. It's a clinician looking at a tremor or rate or things of that nature. And now we have objective technology that could address it. But you're absolutely right. It's just those have not been validated as appropriate endpoints. However, in COVID-19, you would have had, a tsunami of missing data. And so some of this is now being accepted without going to the traditional validation. There's, there's some within study validation, because maybe half the population had standard measures simultaneous to these digital measures, and you could see correlations from that. It's quite innovative, yeah. Got it. And Sam, it looks like you're back. I just wanted to make sure we're not missing any public questions, audience questions, yes.
Looks like there are no other questions right now, but in terms of the poll questions, do you want me to do the reveal right now?
Oh, sure. Let's do it.
Okay. So, first poll question, we just open it right here. Has COVID-19 impacted your ability or your pipeline? So the results were overwhelmingly yes. I believe 62% of you said yes. 23% said a little bit. Surprisingly, 15% said no. Lucky you.
I'm flabbergasted right now. 15%. That was not affected. Wow. Okay.
Absolutely.
Wonder what industry that is exactly. Okay.
Next one was, have you adopted new technology or procedures to support your project? Overwhelmingly, 92%, of course, said yes. And the last question, what are some challenges your organization has faced when adopting these new technologies? Overwhelmingly, people responded getting everyone up to speed. So, understandably. Yeah.
Great. Yes, good feedback. I'd love to actually poll the entire panel over here. And the poll is really going to be about, what's been your favorite technology that you've implemented in the course of COVID-19. So you could have had it, beforehand, but it rose to be your favorite and maybe even crucial technology in your practice. Yeah, could be actually at life or in business. Yeah, we could start off with Elizabeth. You're still pondering it. Maybe Jennifer looks like she already knows what she likes. Yeah, let's see.
I'm thinking about it because, I am in regulatory, and most people know that the government works at a certain speed, maybe called glacier speed. So, not really much of a technology that I've been able to rely on as much as, paper-based.
I see. So not much tech and rec.
Right.
The last part of the operations, right, in ClinDev that will adopt. Okay, that's fine. We can move on. Dan, how about Danny?
You actually cut out in my audio when you were asking the question.
Danny, just your favorite tech. Your favorite tech that you've come to love during this crisis.
My favorite. Oh my goodness. Well, actually, since we're on the subject of AI and blockchain, I had a lot of people pushing me towards it because I know a lot of people in Silicon Valley who really wanted me to use it on an enterprise scale, to use it with governments and to actually store a lot of our data and be the first enterprising platform for neonatal health to actually store neonatal data on the blockchain for governments. And that seemed really good. It's just that the only really proven blockchain out there are like logistics for like big soda companies and stuff like that. So these are pretty simple data points that it's going to take a while before we can actually get to what Elizabeth was talking about, which is you need complete data. And between here and there, I think there's some great opportunities there. But beyond that, there's a great company that I really like, Kevin Zinger Automotive. He's trying to revolutionize, manufacturing in the U.S. just by selling you like a $4 million AI like manufacturing suite that will optimize all of your kind of hardware and components. And so he created like a whole car out of this sort of thing. And I think, having supercomputers optimize everything from, of course, proteins all the way to a device like ours, which is a baby incubator. I really love where that's going. And when you combine that with, say, robotics and treatment and, surgery for things like cancer, I'm getting more and more into it. I'm loving it more and more.
Okay, you have a laundry list of favorite technologies. I love that. Yeah, this is great. Robert, what?
This is a funny one. Microsoft Teams and being able to put up your own background. So you get a few laughs, but I guess that's the most used technology because what I told you about us trying to do this integration with Zambon and I guess WhatsApp. So I'm more on the low tech side.
It still works. You still get the same fulfillment, so that works. Yeah. Elizabeth, have you come up with one or two?
I'm really struggling. I love so many. So I guess on the subject of AI, and it's not in the medical field, but I have to give a shout out to Tesla and the driver assist because, as I mentioned, we just moved and it was really great on the long drive after the move exhaustion to have a little help from the car. So if that's fair, it's not exactly business-based. As far as business, I think, like we said, all of these video conferences, and I don't really have a preferred platform. I'm so glad to see so many of them growing. And for the most part, I think some of my fellow panelists may disagree about the connectivity. We still have some challenges, but I think it's really great to be able to connect with people face-to-face from anywhere.
I love that. Stephen?
The most exciting thing that we helped facilitate to come to market was a point-of-care test for respiratory disease used in the emergency room and eventually, maybe someday, in the doctor's office. So rapid turnaround test. It wasn't for COVID, but something similar. We also worked on a traumatic brain injury test that followed the same pathway. So that was exciting stuff. And of course, the payment systems around the world were more or less ill-equipped to handle it. So we got to make the case for that.
Those are great. Raphael?
I mean, the connectivity, the meetings, online, it can be like really good sometimes, especially for like when we connect in Europe and, having one-on-one. For example, when we met with the FDA last year, it was through a teleconference. Right there, or somehow it was very like casual talking to them when our pre-sub meeting. So that's, but sometimes you get, burned out of so many teleconferences all day, especially at the beginning of the pandemic where we were just staying at home and it was just so many of them every day. We had to come back to the lab. We were a startup. So we came back in the middle of July of last year and had to finish projects. And then, mostly that. And I guess in terms of like, this part of the company, I mean, we work remotely, a lot of us, to get that FDA breakthrough device designation submitted, and we got it in February. So that was a pretty big accomplishment, and thanks to like telecommunication, right, with our consultants in Boston, and Washington, and in different parts of Texas, some in Europe. So I guess that's it.
Wonderful. Simon?
Congratulations.
Oh, yeah, congrats on the breakthrough device. Yeah. Simon, can you hear us? I think, speaking of that connectivity, right, Raphael? And when it doesn't work, it epically doesn't. And we'll try Payman again as well.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right. Yeah, sorry about that. I had bad connection. I just arrived to say goodbye, I guess. But yeah, everybody looks like and I'm dating myself, max headroom. It was everybody was had this glitchy feel to the video. Yeah, technology wise, personally, I think the technology enabled a lot of work that encroached upon personal space quite rapidly. And so we have, with my son being also on remote learning. So it was, I had Simpsons on my background just to show this is, it felt like sometimes I'm living Simpsons life. It was crazy for a while, but definitely I think it's that technology has squeezed a lot of efficiency into our life, and so sometimes so I think it's good part, but it has some negative parts too. I think you really get burned out too. Sometimes it's way too many meetings. And now these global meetings, we have meeting that I have colleagues from Belgium, China, and West Coast, and something's got to give. And it's sometimes our turn, sometimes their turn. So, yeah.
No, it's interesting. You're showing some of the downsides of this, right?
Yes.
This is Zoom culture, essentially. You're a little too accessible and accessible to all time zones. And you drop your commute, but every now study shows that you're actually working longer than when you had, full time in person. So that's just the balance that we need to have for us and our teams. Great. I'm going to give one more. Oh, nope. It looks like he's gone. That's okay. I was going to give him another opportunity, Simon. Now, I should say, like professionally or at work, it's these whole analytics capabilities that we have AI. I literally open up my computer. I find out we have a digital therapeutic called Clicatine for smoking cessation, for tobacco use disorder. I open it up. I see how many people have quit smoking, essentially, since I last went to sleep, essentially. Or I could see, since they started their journey, where they're at with their journey and all of this. That's a beautiful use of the data. Obviously, I do it from a sponsor point of view, but people could use that on their own, or case managers could do it for a population or a panel of patients. Payers could do it, for a larger group. So I just love that availability of data in analytic forms and in dashboards, and now AI for personalized solutions. Let's see, outside of that, like personally, Elizabeth, I actually might just say it is also the self-driving cars and everything else that, yes, I'm fascinated, with vehicles, and particularly when it kind of rivals a higher order of human intelligence and multiple data sensors and cameras and optics and radar and everything else that it uses, and obviously traffic and weather reports. Like, if you know all the data points that go into that, it's mind-boggling. But that's what we should be doing. That's how it's a personalized solution. It could differentiate everything from motorcycles and bikes to people, trees, and in the rain, snow, sleet, or shine. No conflict. I'm not like a part of any company that does self-driving cars, but that's cool stuff. Well, I just want to thank this group. It looks like, in a nutshell. Actually, first, are there any closing remarks that folks have? Anything that they're just dying to get out and share to this audience?
Yeah, it's Rob. Shane, one of the things that I've encountered both personally and in my work is the real gaps in transition care, going from hospital. And I mentioned how it was in our clinical trials, but we've imposed barriers. When we talk about digital health apps, AI, we're building another layer away from our most important customer, which is patients. So the more that we can do to help that, it's great care gaps out there. There's no coordination, and everybody knows that it's had a serious illness, has to draw on the system. So I'd like to think that I'm all for technology, and I like the gadgets and all those things, but that's one thing I have to keep in mind. And Stephen, in the reimbursement world, I think sometimes we focus so much on payers, but we need to think about on the patient level, because we're in a rare disease area. Yeah, we're going to get certain level of reimbursement, but that doesn't necessarily promote good outcomes or good good patient care. So I'm not getting on my soapbox right now, but I think that's one of the things we lose sight as we go further into technology or the more complex these healthcare systems get.
That's an amazing shout out. I mean, I've seen it as a practicing clinician and in development too, the transition care and the loss to fun, loss to follow up, everything else that goes on. And just like, I hate to say it, but almost regulation drives into industry advancements and healthcare. It's the CMS reimbursements and other system, right? So when people started looking at 30-day readmissions, that's when all the solutions came around there, and complex care management, integrated care coordination, and so on. And when it became 90 days in certain conditions, the same happened. When it came transition, like post-stroke care, you have to see a vascular neurologist within 30 days. Unfortunately, that's the driving force. But Robert, you're doing it absolutely the other way around. Like, let's not wait for regulators or reimbursements to set those time targets or endpoints. We could do that inherently, organically, and there's certainly a market for that. Yeah,
exactly. But one fact that I'd like to share with the group. I should do a poll question, but you would not guess if you're a newly diagnosed type 2 diabetic. On average, it's over 333 days before you have that second visit. That's in the general population. So, we wonder why we don't get good outcomes and we don't have the right interventions. Those are all things that get lost in the shuffle, and that's that diabetes care digital AI project I worked on addressed that specifically.
Precise. I mean, that's the beauty, right? When you have on-demand access to these solutions using the normal work streams, their smartphone, right? So it's like there's nothing that they have to do outside of their normal day. What do people do when they wake up? You probably check your phone before you check your bed partner or anyone else. And that's exactly, that's what it is. So when I utilize that, that's the behavioral change component. Like, we've known diabetes management, A1C is a snapshot in 90 days that you got to do X, Y, and Z. Other guys, you're going to lose limbs, you're going to become blind, you're going to have heart failure. So it's diet, exercise, lifestyle, take your medications appropriately, have good social relationships, and whatever else that goes along with it. Behavioral change. And that's the beauty of all of these digital health tools. Okay, cool. And connectivity, isolation, and loneliness is actually really independently a risk factor for every complication and every chronic disease is that. And we could influence that tremendously. Okay, great. I think I started going on my soapbox. You're rubbing off on me, Rob. Okay. Anyone else?
Well, there's a great story, I guess, that I think Jennifer specifically would probably appreciate coming from the regulatory background. I've been managing regulatory students about 60 at a time every semester for the past 5 years. They're all getting the master's in regulatory through Northeastern, and they were the ones who actually helped us get through the EOA process with just a handful of other regulatory experts kind of leading from behind. And I guess the perfect case scenario of what everybody was speaking about when it came to having, just a very small, tight-knit group and having very nicely organized Zoom meetings, maybe once or twice a week, we were able to turn, FDA requests around within days and weeks. And these are students with zero, experience in the real world. Some of them had a little bit of experience, but all of them have gone on now to become really amazing. I mean, within a year of working for our company, they're all working in, digital health, telehealth solutions, pharma, biotech, just everywhere. And I tell all of them that the kind of experience you guys get with us is basically you're building from the ground up, and it's irreplaceable. And what you're going to learn is essentially all the foundational blocks of where you need to go with any good team. So I'm sure everywhere from Novartis to a startup company is going to really appreciate you, just burning the midnight oil with me, staying up until 3 a.m. and just getting all those wonderful requests that the FDA has for us and getting them turned around very quickly. And coming from a public health background, I could not agree more, with the behavioral side and changing people's culture. So I think it's going to be a major issue moving forward, especially in the United States. We certainly are not a public health focused country. I think we've seen that abundantly clear over the last year. That's why I got into it. It's because we don't have enough people on this ship to actually man it and hopefully avert disaster the next time around, because there should be more emphasis on it. And the more people we have, the more of a cultural shift we can put on, and the more solutions that integrate into this cultural shift that serve humanity, I think it's going to help us a lot the next time around. And God forbid it happens anytime soon, but we have to be prepared. So I appreciate everybody's work here. So thank you very much.
So well said. Any other burning thoughts before we close? I think
Thank
we've
you all.
uncovered. Yeah, I think we've uncovered a lot. Global first approach, right? Patient first, but truly not just the highest patient reimbursement paying first, right? Or even in episodes of care, transition for the longest time, because transition wasn't reimbursed, so that wasn't pursued either developmentally or hospital course to other states. Yeah, absolutely. And AI, we kind of discussed the ethical ramifications that are regionally based, but companies need to take stances themselves. Otherwise, it becomes the wild, wild west. If it's a regulatory focus, of course, you have some guidance, essentially, on how to pursue that, lock software controls and so on, either machine-based learning or rules-based systems. We've covered evidence generation, meeting your needs, not thinking singularly about one country's regulators, but really there's a market. Last time the FDA doesn't buy your solutions, right? They give you market authorization. So then you get the real test. And so kind of thinking of that in an integrated fashion earlier on, I think is quite important. Collectively amongst this group, we've been part of probably the whole chain. There's been digital therapeutics, medical devices, some in combination with pharmaceutical assets, the funding for these projects and companies. We've touched it all, even up to public health missions, and almost the social responsibility and corporate responsibility in this space. I think it's been fascinating. I'm glad it wasn't just a techie AI discussion, because then I'm not the right moderator for that. So no, I appreciate the audience. Let's just double check, Sam. Any last questions from the folks? Because if not, we could close. Yeah.
Let me just see here if we have any questions from the audience. It looks like we do not, and I do want to take a moment to thank you again, Shaheen, for moderating this panel and for your keynote presentation. I want to thank Dr. Rafael again for his staying with us throughout the whole day, from all the way from 8:30 a.m. till now. Again, thank you so much. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Again, all of our panelists and attendees, this session was recorded. We'll have this edited and fine printed so we can distribute it on YouTube, so we can go in and watch it back. And very quickly, I will do our draw now for the Apple Watch that we have. So the lucky winner of the Apple Watch is Omer Khatib from Hologic. Omer, we will reach out to you for this Apple Watch. We'll ship this over to you. Hopefully you should get it by the end of next week, by July 4th. The last prize will be the $400 Amazon gift card. That goes to Dr. Richard Ingalls from Neuro Devices, LLC. Thank you so much, Dr. Richard. And again, ladies and gentlemen, stick around tomorrow. Dr. Shaheen will be back. He'll be one of our chair for tomorrow's short sessions. We have a couple great presentations tomorrow. So feel free to pop in and out per your schedule. I'll leave the platform open in case you guys want to network amongst yourselves in the lounge, lobby, booths, and the VIP. So feel free to talk amongst yourselves and collect passcodes. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.